Hi. I realized that the transition from the last slide to that last file to this file is very rough. I was in the middle of a sentence. This shows a lot about attention and memory. I was recalling the information that I knew that I wanted to convey to you. At the same time, I was aware that that particular file, I was running out of opportunity to record. I was trying to record as much as I could. And unfortunately, it didn't work out so well. And rather than going back and recording that last 15 minutes, I'm just going to continue forward and apologize for that little um, glitch in the recording. And it kind of shows you how memory is. I was trying to attend to two things at one time, very different things, the timing button and the recording minutes, as well as thinking about what I was saying, and sometimes that doesn't work. So on this last segment of how to improve your memory, again, you don't have to buy the $79.99 version of software that they sell at 2 a.m. in the morning. I'm telling you this for free. One of the ways is to encode, use dual coding, use images and meaning together. It helps us understand things if it's appropriate to do so. That's a good strategy. Two ways I'm going to use this notion of enactment or activities. Engage your student in active learning. You engage in active learning and use a lot of examples, application. Think about justifying what you're saying. So that's one way that we can think about this. And I'm going to use activity in another form, which is just activity. What we now know and what's being promoted is that activity, learning, and being active at the same time are very valuable. Activity is thought to increase oxygen flow to the brain, and so that's very helpful. There's been some research lately on actually having kids engaged in a certain amount of physical activity during the learning process, and it's found to be helpful. So I really do question some schools pulling out recess as not necessary, because children are very active during this time period, and that's a very helpful thing for learning. I have sometimes actually asked my students to get up and walk in the halls before an exam. I'll say, let's all go for a walk. And they walk around. Again, that's a very useful thing. I have found that I have as a graduate student, I spontaneously did that. As a faculty member, I spontaneously do that, especially when I used to work in a building that I had better soundproofing than this one, and that in the evening, no, I couldn't disturb anyone. And if I needed to, I worked very late at that particular point in my life, and I would get up and dance and play music very loudly as a way to clear my head and start on a new task. Think about that. A little bit of movement is a really good thing. And again, I'm going to remind you of these ideas we've talked about. Correct for the serial position effect if you're creating instruction where it's a long list of some kind of information that's not inherently meaningful. Think about how to get information on the middle of the list up to the front of the list at some point. Do that kind of switching of information. I have never talked about this before, but overlearning is a really good strategy. Overlearning means that you're going to study something past the point of mastery. Now that may seem odd, but study past the point of mastery. If you study up to mastery, that's fine and you'll do well. If you study past the point of mastery, you have a better chance of retaining that information in the long run. When I teach this course or other similar courses, I'm relearning material that I already know. And that helps me gain very long-term recall of this information. I've added, I don't have just a master list of 10 top things, but 12 top ideas. The 11th idea is distributed or spaced practice over mass practice. I don't think I really need to explain this to you, although I know I was a student and there's a tendency to study right the night before an exam rather than allocating a certain number of time every day or every other day to study a course. No one would consider the basketball team to be doing a good job if the night before the game everybody started practicing and that was the only time they practiced. That would be considered very poor coaching and very poor in terms of the players' ethics. And yet students inevitably don't study a lot. Not everybody, but students don't study during the course of the semester, and then right before a quiz or right before an exam, there's a fury of activity. And you tend to do less well that way. Just like a basketball team, if they only practiced and played the night before a game, would do very poorly. It's the same idea. I'd like you to think about that because that's something I know you'll be able to convey that idea to your students. And finally, I want to talk about mnemonic aids or mnemonic devices. Mnemonic means memory. And there are some examples in your textbook. There are tons of examples on the internet, on YouTube. These are particular mnemonic devices that help us recall information, especially information that's not meaningful. And I think your book has 4 or 5 or 6. There's lots of them, many more. Rhymes are a good one. Actually, song is a good one. When we teach children the alphabet, it's a sing song. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, da, da. That's a really good way to learn information, which is one reason I recall all those songs from 40 years ago when I attended the sock hops in high school because, I was putting words to songs, and that's a really good mnemonic aid. Rhyming is another very similar mnemonic aid. I before E, except after C, or when sounded as A, as in neighbor and way. Other mnemonic aids are like a peg word strategy. Again, that's talked about in your book, or the method of loci, that's talked about in your textbook. I'm not going to go into all the different kinds. I don't need you to be an expert in those. I just need you to know they exist and be able to recognize a few of them. I think that would be useful for you. So we've come to the end of this large segment on cognition and memory. I hope you found it helpful and useful. I didn't cover every single piece of information, but I tried to cover the major characteristics of each memory unit and some helpful hints about how to maximize learning and how to apply this information in your role as a teacher. Again, as always, if you have any questions, email me on the discussion board. I will put up some questions on the discussion board for us to talk about. And finally, as always, be careful out there, and let's go out there and learn to be kind to each other. Good day.